We are live on YouTube.
Dasyam is on the line. Maybe we can keep in the panelist group.
He's back on the panel.
Acha.
Muy bien.
Yeah. No, we have English. Okay.
Morning, Father Bosco. Good afternoon, Father Bosco. Greetings from the United States.
Welcome. Thank you so much. We are waiting for people to join slowly. They will come in, and we'll wait 2-3 minutes more, Father Bob. Good evening, Mr. Vinay Bhaskar garu.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for joining. Yeah, namaste. ఇంకొద్దిసేపట్లో మనం బిగించేస్తామండి. We'll wait few minutes. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Nice
Yes.
seeing you.
Yeah.
How long
Father Bosco, if I sent you a quote, could you pop it up on your screen, on the screen for everyone?
Yes, Father. Could you send it to my phone or to my email, whatever?
I'll do that right now.
Good evening, Vinay Bhaskar garu. My name is Ray. I am from Delhi. Very nice to meet you today. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. బాగున్నారు కదా?
Fine, sir. Very happy to
Very
hear, sir. Chana santosham, sir. Chana santosham.
Very nice to meet you, Andy. Yeah.
Last year వచ్చారా సార్ మీరు వరంగల్కు? Did you come there?
చాలా సార్లు వేరే పని మీద వచ్చాను. ఐడిపిస్ కోసమని భద్రాచలం, ఏటూరు నగరం ఏరియాలో పనిచేసాము 3-4 సంవత్సరాలు.
సార్.
నెక్స్ట్ టైం ఐ కమ్ వస్తాను, మిమ్మల్ని కలుస్తాను నెక్స్ట్ టైం. యా.
కృష్ణాకర్ will be in touch with me, sir.
అవును. యా.
కృష్ణాకర్ గారితో తీసుకొని ఇచ్చేసేయండి. Please do come, sir. Work together for better society.
Sure. I'll coordinate with Krishnakar, sir. Yeah.
Please, sir.
Sure.
How much time does it take, sir?
ఇంకొక 3-4 నిమిషాలు వెయిట్ చేద్దామండి, because we are waiting for more participants to join.
Okay.
You are the first keynote speaker from India, as you know it from the poster. And second, Father Robert Steck, he's already here.
Okay.
We're waiting for more participants and speakers to join.
Okay. కింద పెట్టుకొని చెప్పచ్చు.
Hello, good evening, brother. Vinay Bhaskar.
Good evening. ఇటు పట్టుకుంది ట్రయల్స్
Good evening, Father Bosco.
Vinay Bhaskar, MLA and Chief Government of Telangana. International President MIJARC Krishnakar, young and dynamic youth.
Hello,
Mr.
can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Ah, great. Okay, thank you.
Are you able to hear Elsa, the interpreter today, Mr. Book?
Interpreter? Can you repeat that? I cannot hear anything right now.
Yes. So, Mr. Beck, could you
Yes.
please have a look at the bottom of bar of your screen? You should see a
Yeah.
little globe with interpretation. Just click on English.
Okay, thank you.
And you should be able to hear Elsa. Lovely. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Beck.
Namaskar, good evening, bonsoir, guten Abend, buenas noches, hola, hola. My name is Deepthi. I'm a student and an associate of MIJARC International. A very warm welcome to every one of you to this international webinar on impact of climate change and right to food. Before we start, I would like to share a few important guidelines. I would like to request all the participants to kindly keep their microphones on mute during the entire duration of the webinar. Please unmute your mic only when you have to speak and immediately mute the mic as you complete speaking. There are 3 language choices, that is English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Please select the language by clicking on 3 dots, which indicates more, and then you'll be directed to language interpretation. After that, you will be able to access the webinar in the respective language you choose. If the participants have any questions, then you may choose to enter the questions in the Q&A chat box, and these will be answered at an appropriate time. After every panelist speaks, there will be space for 1 or 2 questions due to time constraints. However, we would encourage and request everyone to put forward your questions in Q&A chat box, and these will be answered by respective panelists at an appropriate time. I would now like to welcome Mr. Krishnakar Kumari, President of MIJARC International, for his welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Deepthi. Good evening, Asians. Good morning, South Americans, delegates, and good afternoon to European participants. I am Krishnakar Kumari, the International President of MIJARC World. It's my pleasure to invite our distinguished dignitaries, especially Honorable Member of Legislative Assembly, my well-wisher, youth friend, and a climate champion, Mr. Dasyam Vinay Bhaskar Garu, Chief Whip of Government of Telangana, India. Warm welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
And also Reverend Father Robert Steck, founder of FEST, USA. A special speaker, today's Nicholas, member of the European Parliament, the Greens, our European Free Alliance. Our climate champions accompany and empower the young people in our own way. Their presence with us speaks volumes. Our eminent speakers, Mr. Philip Buck from DK Austria, Astrod from Fian, Germany, Luz Mary from Peru, and she is a former MIJARC Latin American coordinator and present adult collaborator of Latin America MIJARC. And Professor Annie from Africa, and Father Gerard Moerman from the Netherlands. We all welcome you, everyone, to this international webinar of MIJARC and make our webinar truly international. And once again, behalf of MIJARC International and Talitokimi collaboration, we would like to invite all the speakers, dignitaries, participants, everyone. I hope you will enhance and enjoy this international webinar. Thank you very much.
Deepthi,
Deepthi, you have to unmute your mic.
please unmute your mic.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay. Now
Yeah.
I would like to invite keynote speaker, Shri Dasyam Vinay Bhaskar, Chief Whip, Government of Telangana State, India. Shri Dasyam Vinay Bhaskar is a sincere Indian politician and a member of Legislative Assembly. He represents the Warangal West constituency and is a youth icon. He was 4 times chosen as member of Legislative Assembly in Telangana, representing Telangana Rashtra Samiti, TRS. Over to you, Shri Vinay Bhaskar Garu.
Vinay
Please,
Bhaskar garu, unmute Chera. Please unmute.
Okay, done. Dear International President, my close associate, Mr. Krishnakar Garu, young and dynamic European parliamentarians, Mr. Niklas, respected dignitaries, panelists, delegates, and participants from all over the world. Personally, I have been associated with MIJARC World, had the good fortune of being a local host for 2016 MIJARC World General Assembly, which was conducted at India in Telangana, especially in my consensus, wherein the delegates from 35 countries coming from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe, who were my personal guests at my home, and also enjoyed with them along with dinner and tea and this thing. Anyhow, at this time, when the whole world is wrapped under the COVID-19 global pandemic, this is the most appropriate theme for us to deliberate upon all these issues. Research has shown that there is an increase of 7% poverty in the world due to this pandemic, though it seemingly has improved our climate in one sense. Climate has improved in such as the other living organisms such as tigers, elephants, kangaroos, penguins began to move into the space women have vacated due to the lockdowns. Originally, that space belonged to them, which humans have encroached due to modernization and mechanization of life. Post-COVID pandemic, when women return back to new normal scenario, we need to wait and watch how things turn out to be. India has its own climate action plan and is leading in the global context. Naturally, 8 priorities have been defined, namely solar energy, enhanced energy, efficient, sustainable agriculture, sustainable habitat, water, Himalayan ecosystem, green India, and strategic knowledge on CC, being the 9th focus area. My state, Telangana, is new formed state in our country, formed on 2nd June of 2014. In about 6 years, we have made drastic changes. Our dynamic Chief Minister KCR Garu, on one aspect, is giving rise in agriculture, and he is taking dynamic decisions in revenue systems and welfare schemes also. It has permanently hot and dry weather. 66% of our agriculture is dependent on rains. With diminishing rainfall pattern, we are exposed to risk of drought. And we have 24,000 of lakes, which was again reborn in our dynamic leadership KCR Garu. In state action plan on climate change has following goals: reduction of the impact of climate change on household incomes, particularly in agriculture and other sectors; reduction of impact of climate change on forest green over biodiversity and water system. And our government is on Harita Haram, which will be focusing on greenery and forest and protection of forest and other open spaces, protection of vulnerable population against climate-induced events, reduce on the impact of climate change on human and animal health, achievement of environmental sustainability, including mitigation measures to achieve these goals. The state has set its objective as inclusive and sustainable development of the state that protects the vulnerable sections of the society from adverse effects of CC. Improved ecological sustainability. Provide a framework to undertake actions that deliver benefits for growth and development while mitigating and adapting to CC. Prioritize adoption, mitigation options for the state and identify financing options. Emerging new and innovative policies mechanism to promote sustainable development. We believe we will achieve the targets set by the goal agreements on climate change and SDG in timely manner. As a climate activist, I am committed to reducing the plastic. From 2010 till date, I've been eradicating plastic, and I've been doing so many programs on awareness of plastic usage, focusing on making local population, including students of universities, cities and colleges, climate activists. Generate awareness, for example, during the Ganesh immersion. We celebrate in a big way Ganesh festival. Previously, our ancestors will be celebrating this festival with clay and mud. Now, as people has grown, they are using all, what do we say? Plaster of Paris, which is causing so much of pollution in water. After immersing Ganesha idols in water and lakes, it will be polluted. So to eradicate, to give awareness on this pollution, we are doing every year this Ganesh festival in a large way and encouraging youth to use only mud and Ganesha, that too with what do we say? Non-pollution colors. Anyhow, I'm campaigner myself about refuse plastic and say no to plastic. And personally, when I am invited to a meeting, I make it a condition before accepting that they should not be use any plastic glass, plastic cover, anything which is harmful to environment in that function. If they use it, I do not attend such meetings. For example, as you know, as most of the Indians and most of the other countries know, it's a Kumbh Mela. It's a second Kumbh Mela which will be connecting as MIJARC, one of the largest biannual gathering from all over Telangana, not only from Telangana and other parts of Telangana. That is mostly due to this MIJARC will be connecting for 2 to 3 days, and it will be turnover, pilgrims will be turnover not less than million. So on this occasion also, I'll be educating all the pilgrims that they should not use any plastic covers, plastic glasses, plastic boxes, plastic bottles, which is harmful and which is against climate, which is against pollution. So this is my commitment towards protecting climate, and this session will be useful for all of us. Let's work together and let's give a better society for the future. Thank you, one and all, and special thanks to my brother Krishnakar and all other delegates who has participated in this webinar. Thank you, one and all. We'll work together once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, brother, for your wonderful message, which will definitely give us a encouragement, motivation, and with this spirit, definitely we will work as a climate champions according to you and with your company. And really, your words make us inspiration to move forward as a climate champions further the world. Thank you very much, sir.
So now I
Over to
request.
Deepti.
Okay. Now I request Dr. Obino Mulenga, MIJARC World Chaplain and Deputy Vice Chancellor of Catholic University of Zambia, Africa, to make a college prayer.
Thank you so much. Shall we all pray?
Yeah.
Father in heaven, we come together in this manner so that we can discuss issues which pertain to climate change and also to the saving of our environment. We are all hungry in a world full of abundance. We ask for the grace to see the abundance of our world and enough awareness to acknowledge that we have only one earth to live and thrive in. Give us openness of soul against the devastation of our environment in order to foster ecological balance. We ask for your intercession on behalf of every person hungry for food here on earth and also hungry for your spirit. We give thanks that we can be part of this intercession this world needs. The world is blessed with enough food of the earth for every person, but a lot of people go hungry because of human selfishness and greedy. So we ask for your blessing and intercession that we can be aware of our role to preserve the environment and to make the food available for each and every human being. We pray for the cooperation and support of life-saving assistance to people struggling from food insecurity and hunger around the world. Send life-giving rains at the right time. Create good conditions for families to grow their food. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Father, for the prayer. Now I would like to invite Sanghavi. She will introduce Mr. Robert Steck.
On behalf of Sanghavi, I would like to take this chance to invite Father Robert Steck, a good friend of mine. He founded a big gathering of families and young people 20 years ago. For 20 consecutive years, he has been organizing this great fest in Cleveland, Ohio, and I've been part of this fest for last 6 years. It's an amazing gathering of young people, families, and they have a celebration of faith, fun, games, and there is a great fellowship. Father Robert is an advocate of climate action, and he has inspired young people all over the world. He was in India a few months ago, just before the lockdown. Fortunately, he escaped lockdown, I would say. 2 weeks before the lockdown began, he went back to United States. Father Robert, we are so glad to have you here with us, and please talk to our young people and tell us about how the fest as an event promotes environmental awareness and also inspire our young minds through your thoughts and ideas.
It's a great blessing to be with all of you today. As Father Bosco mentioned, I had the opportunity to be in India back in February, and one of the things that he and I talked quite a bit about is the power of people coming together, working together. So the fest is just one example that I have in the United States of bringing typically 45,000 people together. This year, thanks to the power of all things we're using today, we were able to bring over 200,000 homes together back in August. And it really resonates the theme that Pope Francis is going to present on October the 4th, the Feast of St. Francis. He's going to talk about and present an encyclical on the power of the human fraternity, of all of us working together. And whether it's working together to address climate change, which is so desperately needed, to feed those who are in need, the power of all of us working together. And yesterday, Pope Francis was able to address the United Nations. And his comments to the United Nations, while he was speaking to the world leaders, it was as if he was speaking to each of us. This is what he said yesterday. We are faced then with a choice between two possible paths. One path leads to the consolidation of multilateralism as an expression of a renewed sense of global co-responsibility, a solidarity grounded in justice, and the attainment of peace and unity within the human family, which is God's plan for our world. The other path emphasizes self-sufficiency, nationalism, protectionism, individualism, and isolation. It excludes the poor, the vulnerable, and those dwelling on the peripheries of life. That path would certainly be detrimental to the whole human family, causing self-inflicted wounds on everyone. It must not prevail. And while he was speaking to the world leaders, it's as if he was speaking to us. That every day we have a choice that we can take care of ourselves, which isn't working, or we can use moments like today to come together, to renew our commitment to work together to address the problems that face the entire human family. The problems especially of protecting our climate and creating a world community where every sister and brother finds the help, the hope, the food, and the support that they need. And today should be a day of hope for all of us as we come together to try to tackle the much deeper problems of isolation, of selfishness, of individualism, as opposed to seeing ourselves, as he'll talk about on October the 4th, as one human family in solidarity, that all of us need to work together to protect our climate, to protect our world, and to create a world family where every sister and brother are provided. And I sent the quote that I just shared to Father Bosco, and I hope he'll share that with us, because it's a choice that I have to make, that we have to make, as well as our world leaders. The other thing that I sent to Father Bosco that I'll ask him to share, and it's a silly little thing, but I'm very blessed with a strong family. And in my parish, actually, which is actually pretty large for the United States, there's about 6,200 families and about 18,000 people. But numbered in that is my own family. God bless my mom and dad. I think they raised us right to realize that in a time where families don't stay together, my family has chosen to stay together. Anyhow, long story short, I have a 15-year-old niece, Becca. And Becca is a beautiful child of God. Father Bosco knows about her. She has the heart of Mother Teresa. She really does. So long story short, back in the spring, she said, Uncle Bob, we should plant fruit trees. A 15-year-old saying this. We should plant fruit trees on our campus, on our church campus, so that we can harvest apples and pears and other fruit to give to those who need them. So what does the good uncle do? He actually planted the fruit trees this year, and she and I together beautifully did this together. Well, if you know anything about fruit trees, they should never, ever, ever produce fruit in the first year. But on one apple tree, there is exactly one apple. It is perfect, it is beautiful. And when I saw that apple emerge, I said to myself, that's hope. It only takes one person, like a 15-year-old girl, to say, we should plant fruit trees so that we can harvest the fruit and give it to those in need. And of all the trees, there's one apple, which gives the promise and the hopefulness that in the years ahead, it will produce abundantly. But before there's 100 apples, there's one apple. And before there's 1 million people working together, there's 1 or 2 or 3 of us. and that apple, and he'll show you the picture. All the trees never should produce in the first year 1 apple. That's hope. And today is a day of hope for all of us, coming together, renewing our commitment, as Pope Francis says, to make the choice not to be in isolation, but to be in solidarity together. And that if we work together, Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 of us come together, God is there in the midst of them. And with God's help, working together, we can tackle climate change, which is horrific across the world, and use it as a moment to make sure that every sister and brother has what they need. So it's a blessing to be able to be with you. And again, I've shared that quote with Father Bosco. I hope that he'll share that with you, as well as the silly little picture of 1 apple on 1 branch, inspired by a 15-year-old girl who said, Uncle Bob, we should plant fruit trees so that even here in the United States, those who have need will have what they need. God bless your efforts today. May God bless this conference, and may the Lord allow great fruit to come from it. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Robert Steck. Now, I would like to invite Reshma Shreya Kancharla. She will introduce Mr. Niklas Ninas. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Reshma Shreya Kancharla, a student of Assam Don Bosco University. I feel very honored to have this opportunity to welcome Mr. Niklas Ninas, member of the European Parliament and head of the regional unit of Green Europe. He lives in Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, a beautiful part of Germany. He said that he has never for a moment regretted his decision of choosing MV as his home. The Wild East is not the same everywhere. As the most sparsely populated state, MV is something very special. But MV also deserved more pension, more wages, more opportunities, and more innovation, more opportunities for family, more infrastructure for startups and communities, and more landscape protection. Born in 1992 at the age of 28, Mr. Niklas has emerged as one of the youngest politicians of our time. He is very committed to development policy and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were decided by the UN in 2015 and form the cornerstone of the 2030 Agenda. Global development concerns us all, and a change in our economic and consumption patterns is crucial for the continued existence of our civilization. Mr. Niklas will be speaking on perspective of Green Europe, what we can learn from the larger world, and how food security considered in this area. Over to you, Mr. Niklas.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for this very warm introduction. Good day, everyone. I'm saying good day because what I always find fascinating when we have these conferences over the internet, we have people from the US joining in, from India, from Africa, from Europe, all over the world. So good day is the only real thing that I can say, because it's in some part of the world at the moment it's noon, it's morning, and in others it's evening. And so good day is the only thing that really fits at the moment. It's a great thing, and I like the words of Mr. Steck here, that we all come together and work on this issue together. We now live in a world that is already 1.2 degrees warmer than 200 years ago. And that sounds like a little bit. I mean, 200 years ago, 1.2 degrees, normally we don't tend to see the difference or feel the difference of 1.2 degrees on a warm day, on a cold day. However, to be true, this is a giant spike if we look at the broader picture here. And that is something that is devastating to us all, or should be devastating to us all. And the truth is that only a small amount of countries is really responsible for this big change in temperature. We all know it comes from the emission of CO2 into the atmosphere. And in the last 200 years, if we look at the emittents who have delivered the most to to the overall emissions, then there's only a sparse number of countries, namely the US, the European countries, and China, to be reliant for this change in climate that we see at the moment. And the truth is also, our ancestors didn't listen and they didn't care, or they don't seem to care, because the knowledge of the devastating effects of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is well known, or was already well known in the 1950s. And since the 1970s, people were talking about this and were saying, if we don't change the way we produce, if we don't cut on carbon emissions, if we don't find other ways to make wealth distributed without the emission of carbon dioxide, then we will have a very big problem in 20 to 40 years. And now 20 to 40 years, we're in this big mess that our ancestors left to us. So in the past, we saw that short-term profits seem to be more important than the life of millions, because there was even a study submitted from Shell, the big oil company, that said exactly that the combustion of fossil fuels continues to threaten the life of millions, especially in poorer regions. And still, it was deemed to be more important to excavate oil and gas in order to make a profit for those holding the shares. And the diabolic irony, I believe, in this is that those who emitted the most, that those who have profited the most of the biggest emissions, are the ones that have to fear the least the consequences of climate change. Because smaller countries and remoter countries, poorer countries that emit less carbon dioxide, are the ones that will see biggest threats out of rising sea levels, that will see more remote areas being converged in conditions that are not livable, whereas richer regions have the possibility to build higher dams and mitigate the consequences of their doings. So in a cruel sense, if you look at the leaders who are denying climate change, like Trump and Bolsonaro, there's a very interesting difference, I believe, in between those two. Whereas Trump is emitting, or his country is emitting, quite a lot of carbon dioxide. If he says, I don't care about climate change, or I don't believe in climate change is a hoax, then at least he's just threatening the lives of his own people in a very short margin, because they actually have the capacity to build up dams. They have the capacity to get people into safety when the fires roar in California, and they have the capacities to rebuild everything when the storms hit the western coast. If Bolsonaro does the same, he really lets his own people die, because they do not have the capacities to help out their people. They do not have the capacities to rebuild what the storms and fires destroy. So we have an assumption in this world that around 2050, if we continue as we do right now, we will have a world which is at least 3 degrees warmer than it used 200 years ago. And that means that we can assume of around 1 billion people being dislocated from their homes. Being dislocated means that they have to leave their home because it got into drought, because there were fires roaring, because there was sea levels rising. And this really brings us in a situation that is unbelievable, that is really devastating for us, and especially for our children and our children's children. If you look at it, what it means that we will have fights over necessities, of a basic necessity like food and water. And this will lead to a conflict that brings to us also questions that are simply in a moral way, not easily to answer, or not answerable at all. If you have to defend your own life because you're fighting for water, is it rightful to kill others in order to do so? And this is the half truth that we have to face if we continue the path that we are going at the moment. And that is the future that the people are leaving, or our ancestors are leaving to us, with decisions to be taken that are not easily taken. So where do we go from here? And I think we live in a world that is in a quite big of a paradoxon. If you look at it, so far the emission of CO2 is really very much connected to the wealth of the nation, and that is something troublesome, because obviously every country, every person in the world deserves a better living and has the right to be to have a prosperous life. But the issue is with that, if we go all the same path, and if we do not disconnect the wealth of a nation from the emission of carbon dioxide, then we will have a big problem if we want to deliver a world of prosperity to everyone, because that would mean a world that is well over 3 degrees hotter and a world that is not livable anymore. So we need to find a way to break this relation between wealth and CO2 emissions in order for the prosperity in the world to grow. For that, at the very first problem we need to solve is the problem of food and nutrition in the world. We see at the moment that the common agriculture, as we call it in Europe, seems to fail. It seems to fail because it takes so much nutrition out of the soil that it's not livable for the future, not sustainable. The same way we see in this agriculture is that if you don't use the surrounding, if you don't use the environment, then it will turn back on you, and in overall you will continue to put fertilizer on the field just to regrow what you have, and this fertilizer production again costs a lot of CO2 emissions. So where we need to go is into an ecological agriculture that solves the needs that we have from people's nutrition issue, but also are resilient to the climate change impacts that we face. Only if we turn around the agricultural path that we have at the moment, we can have a future in which food can be delivered to everyone, as well as in comparison with the climate change issue, so that these 2 points work together. The second rule that we need to follow is we need to reduce our consumption. And we need to figure out what it means to be prosperous. If we all go in the way that we see at the moment in the Western world, where really prosperity comes with a huge amount of consumption, then we do have a problem. Because if you look at the World Overshoot Day, the day in which we have used up all the resources that we have for a year, and that is this year, it was very late, it was this year in 22nd of August, but it's already horribly short in the year if you think about it. So after only almost 9 months, we have taken up all the resources that we have for a whole year. Last year, by the way, it was already in July, at the end of July. If we continue this path, then we will have a big issue, especially if we want to have more people being prosperous. If we continue the consumption in that way, then we simply do not have the resources in this world to make everybody prosperous. So we need to cut down on consumption. So the question is how to get there. And I think there's 3 main areas that we need to focus on. One of them is we need a fixed world budget of carbon dioxide. That is the very first thing. We know exactly how much carbon dioxide we can emit until the year 2050. We can cut that down to a per capita CO2 budget that leaves us with a very interesting chart. If every human has the same amount of carbon dioxide that they can put out, we will see that some areas and some humans use less carbon dioxide, especially in poorer regions, whereas in richer regions, the capita amount of carbon dioxide is way higher. So in order to get that stressed out, the richer regions would need to buy the CO2 budget from the poorer regions, letting money flow into those regions and giving prosperity around the world and helping them to reach up in the world. If we can combine that with what I said earlier concerning the prosperity being not aligned with the CO2 emissions, then we can see a world that will be prosperous for everyone in the future, while at the same time reducing our carbon footprint to an amount that is feasible for the world to carry on. The second question is, we need to get everyone involved. And with everyone involved, I'm saying that everybody, depending on their power and their strength to act, should act accordingly. If 1% of the humans, of the humanity, control over 30% of everything that there is in the world, then those 1% need to be doing more than the other 99%. Because if they control 30% of the wealth, then they should invest more and invest these 33% to help the issue. We can find ways to do that, and I would hope for that the rich people, and with rich people I also mean in a global scale, basically the top 10% are already for the Western world, that they find a way and see that this is an issue that relies on them, that triggers them as well, because their income is threatened, and so they need to act. But if they don't want to, then we need to find ways to bring them into action, and that also implies taxing the very rich in that regard to take action. We need to take action. There's no chance to not do it. And the very last thing, or not very last thing, but the last point that I wanted to say, and that really goes in line with what Mr. Sturck said, is we need to face this issue together. This is an issue for humanity. It's not an issue for China or the US or Europe or India. It is an issue for all of us. We are all in this world together, and this issue really depends on all of us taking action now. So we must not play the blame game. I don't want to hear about, well, you have done so much here and you're emitting there and you're doing not that and this. No, it doesn't matter where we come from, where we stand at the moment. The only thing that matters is where we are going to. And the thing that we need to all agree on is we want to rescue this world by not emitting carbon dioxide anymore in 2050. And only if we agree on this and work on this together, then we have a chance to really work on this issue. So please, and thank you very much for bringing us all together from all these different sides of the world. And let's work on this together. And I have one question for our theologists here. As Bob mentioned earlier, he said, Jesus said, if 2 or 3 come together, then God is amidst them. In German, it says he's in between them. And so my theory here is, if we come together in this world from all these different places, then God must be in between all of us. If we take lines between the places where we are right now, I can very much believe that God should be then covering quite the whole of the world. Is that right, or am I doing my theological there wrong?
Thank you so much, Mr. Nicholas, for your insightful words. Your views are very reflective and enlightening. We now open the floor for some questions. We will have the chance to raise only 2 questions at this moment. If anyone has questions, they can unmute their mic.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
yes. Yes, Harika, you can go ahead with your question.
Ma'am, voice వినిపించడం లేదు మ్యామ్ అసలు.
It's Sharon who is asking question.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, Sharon.
Could you unmute yourself, Sharon?
Yeah. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, and please unmute your, also put your video
My
on.
video, I don't have the access of video. Can the host please give me the option for video?
Please ask, don't worry, go ahead.
Can you see me? Yeah. So my question is to Mr. Nicholas. It's very great for hearing all the wonderful words about climate change and all the sources that we are having for the development and also for the changes that we have to look up to. One point that is mentioned by Mr. Nicholas is about the leaders who were failing to look up into these issues of how to, resolve them and all such. So my question is, how far do you think the younger generation that is coming up should be trained enough to look into these issues like this? Should they be educated enough, or should they take up their time, or should the teachers or their schools that they're going through have to enlighten them in getting these issues to be known and to encourage them into finding a solution for these issues? May I know, does education help them in knowing all such?
Should I answer directly, or do we wait for one more question? But I can answer directly, then you can point the question in the chat. I think the question of education is a very important one, and especially in Germany, at the moment we're discussing if it could be possible to introduce a course in school that is actually environmental education, not just concerning climate change questions, but also, as my previous speaker talked about, plastic reduction, for example. That could be a point in there as well. And I think that's a very good way to go forward, to get more education, to get more knowledge about this issue. But there's one meme or comic that is not getting out of my head. And that is one in which, the older people said, well, you young people, you should all go to school so you know more about this world, and don't tell us anything before you don't know anything. So go learn something, and then we can talk again. So they sent the children to school, and these children go to school. They learn, for example, about climate change. And then they come back and they say, we have a problem here. We need to fix this problem because there's climate change going on. And we need to fix it for the future. And then the same parents say, well, you think you know everything just because you went to school. Why don't you? Now you're trying to reduce our wealth, and you're trying to do our politics and so on and so forth. So the thing here is, yes, education is important, and especially important to educate the upcoming generation. But let's face it, we don't have the time to wait until our generation is in charge, is in power, and they can change everything. By that time, when the older generation is in pension, and the younger generation is taking over all these jobs of bosses and politicians and so on and so forth, it will be too late to change anything about climate change. We need to act right now. So we don't need education for the young people, I do believe, not just for the young people. I think we already have quite a lot of education for the young people that is going in the exactly right direction. We especially need education for the elderly people, for the grown-ups, and for the decision makers that we have at the moment that are not willing to listen. And then thirdly, if that's not possible, and if you're confronted with people, decision makers that just do not care about science, then we need to vote them out, get rid of them, and especially make sure that young people with all this knowledge and education take over their position. That is one of the reasons why I became a politician, because I said there is no time for waiting. It is time now to act, and it is time now to bring this young point of view into politics, into the decision-making process. And therefore, I can just encourage everybody, every young person, to take up action and to go into politics and try to move something, whether being it on the national level or the regional level or even your community level. Or your mayor's position. It is important to get involved, because if you look at the decision makers and the age of them, I know that in the European Parliament, the what is it called? The overall age of the members is 62, and the overall age of Europeans is only, I believe, 40 something, which is already quite old. If you look at the US, same issue there. Almost 70 is the overall age of the senators, whereas the overall age of Americans is only 36. And so there are people there being double as old as the average person in the countries, making all the decisions for them, but living in a timeline that has seen so much differences. Just one more word about that. You know, in our history in Germany, Germany used to be divided for so long. But I grew up in a Germany that was not divided anymore. I grew up 2 years after it came back together. So I've never seen a border wall. I've never seen the division of Germany or the division of Europe. But my parents, and especially this generation that grew up with that have seen Germany divided for all the time, is doing politics at the moment and is doing it with this focus in mind of a knowledge that Germany used to be divided and that there cannot be changed. And that's something that we can bring into. And that's why young people need to get into politics and need to be involved into a decision-making process and need to take on power as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for your wonderful words, and it's really quite impactful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. We have time for, I think, one more question if anyone wants to ask.
I would like to ask one question, Nicholas. You quoted Jesus where 2 or 3 are gathered there, and in between them, like in Germany, you said, I'm amidst them. So this is what I see, young people taking courage, coming together. And it takes one person to take the lead and all will join. So we see Greta Thunberg, you said we need environmental education. We need also passionate young people like Greta Thunberg. So would you explain more about her? Because we have people from all across the world and they need to take inspiration from her. How do you project her as an inspiration for young people, especially teenagers?
I think what Greta really shows is that, how do you say that, that commitment really pays off. What when we tend to think of Greta Thunberg, we think of her leading this very big protest for climate justice. But if you think about it, where she started off, she used to sit in front of the Reichstag in Stockholm for 3 or 4 months alone, sitting there with her sign and demonstrating alone for this issue. And if you do that, you know, I know that everybody who starts protests and so on, they think this is a very important issue. And if I go protest, then surely people will follow so soon. I be there the first time, I will be there alone. The second time, there will be 10 people. The third time, there will be 50 people. And then there will be 100 people. That's not a fact. The fact is that you'll be there alone, sitting there in rain and being laughed at. And people will say, well, look at your protest being there alone. That's not helping at all. Why are you going to school? Why not? doing anything useful. But she really continued and had the courage and the was it called the power to stay and to just say, no, it's important to do it, and I'm not doing it to gain attention from a lot of people. But I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and I'll continue to do it, and I'll continue to do it next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, and the week after that. And only after 3 or 4 months, people started to join her, and only after 6 months, we saw a massive movement of young people all over the world. And that shows us really that if you're committed, you need to stay with it, and you must not fear to be laughed at, or you must not fear to fail, but you must continue. You must continue your idea, and you must stand for your ideal, and then you can really lead to a bigger thing. So that is something that I think is the biggest message that we can learn from Greta Thunberg: to stay committed and to stay focused on what we believe.
Father Basco, if I could jump in for a moment. If you think about a child starts very intuitively wanting to give, help, share, and care for others. Think about where they're at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 years old. We all think it's adorable that they move around, and actually selfishness becomes the learned response. Intuitively, they know to give, to help, to share. Think about how we raise our children. And that's where even how across the world do we put that mindfulness of the human global family, of global solidarity, of sharing, caring, respecting, and instead of selfishness becoming the learned response, we continue to nurture a mindfulness of global solidarity, of sisters and brothers. And that's if there's a good thing that has even come from this pandemic. For example, how do we find young people, even my niece, 14, 15 years old, how do we bring them together in conversations like this across the world so that they can see one another? They would be fascinated, intrigued, engaged, but that would also then be a part of our mentoring them forward to build a better world. So even some of your great work that you're doing in Talitha Kum, right? How do we connect those young women with young women across the world and create use the online platform for mentoring and support, even just to focus specifically on global hunger? There's a great compassion in our young people. We need to facilitate and unleash that compassion, and we need to change the benchmark of success, which is so often economic success, but success is when everybody is cared for.
Thank you so much, Father, and thank you so much, Mr. Nicholas, for taking out time and sharing your thoughts. Over to you, Dipti.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite Joao, Vice President of MIJARC World, to introduce Luz Mary from Peru. I'm so sorry. I'd like to invite Joao, Vice President.
Hola. Ahora me escuchan. Qué bueno estar reunidos juntos. Muchas gracias por la presencia de todos y estamos muy contentos, muy felices por esta realización en este tiempo difícil que estamos pasando. Luz Mary Benavides Sorillo es de Cajamarca, Perú, de Latinoamérica. Es educadora de profesión, orientadora a la facilitación de procesos de formación en la educación pública y educación comunitaria hace años, jóvenes, niños y adultos de la zona urbana y rural. Es especialista en gestión de programas y proyectos de desarrollo coordinadora del equipo técnico de la mesa de la pastoral del mundo del trabajo, colaboradora de MIJARC Perú y MIJARC Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Entonces es una persona que tiene una buena experiencia a nivel mundial y que puede compartirle con nosotros en este momento acá. Bienvenida Luz.
Ask Rosemary to unmute.
Ok, hola, hola. Ahora sí. Muy bien, ok. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. Permítame saludarles en un primer momento. Señor Kumari Krishnakar, presidente mundial de MIJARC. Señor João de Deus Souza, vicepresidente mundial de MIJARC. Padre Ovino, asesor mundial de MIJARC. Expositores todos y público del Movimiento Internacional de la Juventud Agraria y Rural Católica de África, Asia, Europa, Latinoamérica y el Caribe, que se han dado cita al presente webinar. Hablar con ustedes es muy significativo para mí porque el impacto del cambio climático en la seguridad alimentaria me interesa y debe ser de interés de todo ser humano. Como rurales, como campesinos, debemos ser conscientes de la implicancia que tiene en nuestra vida y en la vida de los demás. El cambio climático es una amenaza clara y devastadora para toda la región de América Latina y el mundo. Y si hablamos del impacto en la alimentación, es mucho más preocupante porque tiene que ver con la vida. ¿Por qué tiene impacto en la seguridad alimentaria? Porque justamente la alimentación es la base principal para mantenernos sanos, sentirnos bien, tener energía y por ende tener vida. Además, tiene una relación directa con la naturaleza y esta está siendo devastada por el cambio climático a causa de la acción del propio hombre. Tenemos actualmente temperaturas muy altas, tenemos catástrofes con más frecuencia, las estaciones ya no están marcadas, hay sequía de agua y esto está afectando a la agricultura y es una gran amenaza para la alimentación. Entonces, es muy importante reconocer las interrelaciones que hay entre el hombre, la alimentación y la naturaleza, las cuales están siendo muy afectadas por el cambio climático. Y no solo por el cambio climático, sino también por las propias políticas de Estado y el modelo económico que son impuestos por el sistema capitalista, el sistema neoliberal. Vamos a ir un poco definiendo la seguridad alimentaria. ¿Qué es la seguridad alimentaria? En la cumbre de 1996 nos dicen que la seguridad alimentaria existe cuando todas las personas tienen en todo momento acceso físico, social y económico a alimentos suficientes, inocuos y nutritivos que satisfacen sus necesidades enérgicas diarias y preferencias alimentarias para llevar una vida activa y sana. Por lo tanto, la seguridad alimentaria es el derecho a la alimentación que gozamos todos los seres humanos. Sin embargo, este derecho viene siendo postergado para muchos, especialmente los más pobres, los más necesitados y en nuestro caso, en nuestra región de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, los rurales, los campesinos, los indígenas. Hoy estamos frente a una grave crisis ambiental y a esto se suma la crisis sanitaria, la crisis económica, la crisis social. En Perú, por ejemplo, a raíz de la COVID-19, hubo un confinamiento determinado por el gobierno de más de 100 días, con una población donde más del 70% son parte del trabajo informal y se ganan el pan en el día a día. ¿Cómo podrían vivir estas personas sin salir a buscar el sustento diario de sus familias? Imposible, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo puede vivir una familia con un bono de 390 soles durante 6 meses, que significa tener $0.50 cada día, situaciones reales, pero también inaceptables. La población de las zonas rurales, pueblos jóvenes, ¿cuentan con los alimentos suficientes y nutritivos para llevar una vida activa y sana? La respuesta es no, indudablemente. Estamos ante una situación tan precaria que si no te mata ahora la COVID-19, te mata el hambre. Y el hambre es producto de la indiferencia e insensibilidad de nuestros gobernantes y quienes definen las políticas y las órdenes mundiales. Necesitamos urgente cambiar de rumbo, necesitamos cambios estructurales y profundos, donde prevalezca la persona, la naturaleza y la madre tierra. Hoy voy a citar a Roger Rumril, quien nació en la Amazonía y es experto nacional e internacional en temas indígenas. Nos dice que la cuenca de la Amazónica fue noticia mundial en el año 2019. Más de 72.000 incendios arrasaron y convirtieron en cenizas más de 1 millón de hectáreas de bosques solo en Brasil. En Bolivia, en la región de la Chiquitanía, se convirtieron en humo centenares de miles de hectáreas de bosques. Lo mismo va pasando en Perú y otros países de la región. ¿Cómo tener seguridad alimentaria con estas semejantes catástrofes? ¿Quiénes son los más afectados frente a estos siniestros? ¿Quiénes son los responsables directos de estos acontecimientos? Surgen muchas reflexiones y nos quedan grandes desafíos. Por ello, como son un movimiento de jóvenes y de acción, necesitan aprovechar y movilizar la gran fuerza que tienen como jóvenes, la creatividad, la capacidad y el entusiasmo. ¿Para qué? Desde mi punto de vista, encuentro 3 caminos. 1, rescatar saberes ancestrales frente al cambio climático de nuestras propias comunidades. 2, desarrollar nuevos hábitos ecológicos que nos permitan vivir en armonía con la naturaleza. Hay que reducir el consumo o usar las 3 R, reducir, reutilizar y reciclar. 3, necesitamos incidir políticamente para generar políticas públicas que promuevan la transversalización del derecho a la alimentación y al territorio, la madre tierra, y que reconozcan las diferentes necesidades de nuestro medio ambiente y nuestro planeta. Los gobiernos deben promover planes de acción con sus respectivos presupuestos para enfrentar el cambio climático en cada país y dentro de los mismos. Si bien es cierto, hay muchas prácticas significativas de la Iglesia, del movimiento y de la sociedad civil, pero necesitamos fortalecer muchas acciones más. Por ejemplo, la Juventud Agraria Rural Católica de Perú viene desarrollando una campaña Decoremos la Tierra con Árboles. Muchos jóvenes vienen plantando árboles a nivel nacional. Estas experiencias, ¿por qué no desarrollarlas en todos los países a nivel del mundo? Otra acción que ya fue mencionada por mi antecesora también, que me gustaría rescatar, es la acción de Greta con Viernes para el Futuro. Una acción individual con un gran impacto a nivel mundial. También debemos considerar y debemos tomar estos modelos o estos ejemplos para que cada uno de nosotros, nuestras familias y todos los involucrados en nuestras organizaciones podamos tomar conciencia de lo necesario y lo importante que es desarrollar acciones a favor de nuestro medio ambiente. También lo dice el Sínodo Panamazónico, que la Iglesia se compromete a ser aliada de los pueblos amazónicos para denunciar los atentados contra la vida de las comunidades indígenas, los proyectos que afectan al medio ambiente, la falta de demarcación de sus territorios, así como el modelo económico de desarrollo depredador y ecocida. La defensa de la tierra no tiene otra finalidad que la defensa de la vida. También Papa Francisco, en su mensaje para la Jornada Mundial de la Paz, enero 2020, nos dice que ante las consecuencias de nuestra hostilidad hacia los demás, la falta de respeto por la casa común y la explotación abusiva de los recursos naturales vistos como herramientas útiles únicamente para el beneficio inmediato, sin respeto por las comunidades locales, por el bien común y por la naturaleza, necesitamos una conversión ecológica. ¿Por qué necesitamos una conversión ecológica? Porque justamente nuestras propias acciones están siendo devastadoras para nuestra casa común, que es nuestro planeta, y están atentando contra nuestra propia vida y con nuestros propios territorios. Todos somos responsables, pero en distintos niveles. Gran parte de responsabilidad están en las grandes empresas transnacionales y los gobiernos de turno que se alinean a intereses económicos y a las políticas neoliberales, que solo buscan mejorar sus arcas económicas sin importarles la vida y cada vez van creando grandes brechas de desigualdad social. Tal es el caso de Minera Yanacocha en Cajamarca, Perú, por ejemplo, que viene operando más de 25 años y la región se ubica en el grupo más alto de pobreza y extrema pobreza. Por cierto, es mi región donde yo he nacido, ¿no? Es lamentable estos datos, pero esa es la realidad en que estamos viviendo. ¿De qué seguridad alimentaria podríamos hablar aquí en esa región? Y ahora, según la reactivación económica de parte del gobierno, apuesta por la apertura de muchos proyectos mineros más que solo garantizan la extracción de nuestros minerales, la contaminación de las aguas y el posicionamiento de los territorios, desplazando al campesino, a la campesina de sus propias tierras, dando lugar más a la pobreza, a la exclusión y por ende a la desigualdad. Papa Francisco nos dice claramente, no podemos esperar seguir creciendo a nivel material sin cuidar la casa común que nos acoge. Nuestros hermanos, nuestras hermanas más pobres y nuestra madre tierra gimen por el daño y la injusticia que hemos causado y reclaman otro rumbo. ¿Qué rumbo? ¿Cuál es el rumbo, estimadas jóvenes del mundo? La tarea tan grande para cada uno de ustedes, para cada uno de nosotros, ¿no? Desde mi punto de vista, pienso que la niñez y la juventud necesita construir el presente y el futuro ahora. Es momento de empoderarse y ser el signo de esperanza y transformación que garantiza el bien común desde el enfoque ambiental. Necesitamos un nuevo modelo ecológico que garantice la igualdad y la equidad, que la brecha entre ricos y pobres se acorten y que hagamos nuestro el paradigma del buen vivir, donde el hombre vive en armonía con la naturaleza y define sus propios modelos de producción y consumo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Luz, por tu contribución, por la participación, por nos traer informaciones muy importantes para este momento.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mary, for the
Si
impactful
alguien
presentation.
tiene alguna pregunta o aporte a hacer, ¿alguien? ¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Alguna contribución, aporte?
There is not a question. That's hello.
Hola.
Hello. Can you get video for me? I'd like to comment on Lucy's presentation. Hello. First and foremost, I would like to thank Ruth for her presentation. And I'm sure Ruth's presentation is a long-lived experience in MIJARC. And we are very grateful as a MIJARC world that her contribution has made the Latin America team to be very involved in our activities. So this involvement is a very a candid one, and would want her to continue inspiring young people, because when you're talking about issues to do with the environment, they have to first of all sink into the minds of young people, so that we know they are the present as well as the future. But as already been observed, sometimes young people, once they are not inspired by elderly to believe in what the values which would help us preserve the environment, then they will be discouraged also, and they will not maybe soldier on to fight these ills of society, especially the awareness that we have only one environment, we have only one earth. So which means this has to sink into young people so that they are able to help this fight. And once adults remain quiet, then probably this will not achieve much, will simply fail. Yeah, because young people learn from the adults, and already has been mentioned by one of the presenters, this kind of education has to be ongoing. So thank you so much, Luz, for your involvement. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos ustedes.
Gracias, Luz. ¿Más alguien?
Thank you very much, Luz, for your wonderful presentation. Really, we are very happy that you are a member of our MIJARC world. You work as a Latin American coordinator, and right now you are working as adult collaborator of Latin America. And really, we are very happy and thank you very much for your presence and your great presentation. And really, we thank you on behalf of MIJARC World for giving your service to as an adult collaborator, encouraging the young people in Latin America. So I hope you will continue the same, accompany with MIJARC World. So together we make a beautiful world of MIJARC, agriculture and rural young people for the future of young leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnakar Kumari. Now I would like to invite Rufina Selvi, MIJARC Asian Coordinator, to introduce Mr. Philip Buck.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Rufina, MIJARC Asian Coordinator. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Philip Buck. He is the Thematic Desk Officer for Food and Agriculture in Asia and the Desk Officer for Papua New Guinea at DKA Austria. He is involved in international development work since 20 years and is part-time teaching a course on global food system challenges at the University of Vienna. He is also an enthusiastic rooftop amateur vegetable gardener. So now we welcome Mr. Philip to take over the floor. Mr. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And I'm trying to share my screen. Let me see if it works. Can you see my screen? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Very
see
good.
that.
Okay, so I was invited to talk about the right to food and what young people can actually do about it. And I would like to start off with this cartoon here. The message is clear. There is a gap between global discourses and the realities of those affected by them. And I think what we should take with us is that we need to look at the capacities of people to exercise their agency. People need to be empowered. DKA Austria, for those who don't know, is the development agency of the Catholic Children's Movement in Austria. The movement runs a fundraising campaign involving more than 100,000 children every year, and we support about 500 projects globally through that. I would just like to touch on the right to food. The right to food I would like to understand not as a right to charity and mere food assistance, but a right to agency and a right to a proper enabling environment of people. And the right to food is enshrined in many international agreements, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, but also many others. And what we should look at always is the gap between the normative frameworks, laws, and those international agreements, and the actual situation on the ground. And when we do that, we look at the different areas that are covered by the right to food: food production, employment, gender, health and sanitation, etc. So there may be a particular case brought to our attention or involving ourselves. And when we do something about that, we will look at the government side. So that involves the legal framework of the country and the policies and the institutions, budgets, etc. We will try to do that involving civil society, and then we will draw our conclusions and we'll make our requests in terms of the right to food. So basically the right to food touches on various areas of life and society. And I would like to say that that smallholder rights actually are at the heart of many of the transformative debates about climate change, biodiversity, etc. that we talk about today. Smallholders, interestingly, are amongst the most food insecure people globally. And at the same time, they are the key producers of food, especially in those food security hotspots. So it's like a paradox. But if smallholder farming has the right enabling environment, I think it is more sustainable and it is productive and it adds economic value, especially locally. And it is actually thriving if the conditions are right. And smallholder rights are very important for the realization of the right to food. And I'm happy that we will hear more about the Peasants' Rights Declaration, or the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working on the Land. Very long title. That we will hear about in the next presentation more. So what can young people actually do? First of all, of course, there's Laudato Si. That is there not only for contemplation, but should also be there to guide our concrete action. And it can be used to make the case inside the Catholic world. Basically, my thoughts here are based on our internal discussions inside DKA, that we will be engaging our partners in Asia about, and MIJARC will be also kept in the loop about that. Youths basically have a right to a healthy environment. They have rights as consumers and also as potential future people working in rural areas. And they have a right to participate in decisions that are taken today for shaping future food systems. And young people, of course, can do things on a personal level, changing the way they engage with food systems, like Greta Thunberg that we've been hearing about. But I think other than Greta Thunberg, there are also many other examples that we can, for example, see in our projects in India or the Philippines. Young people that get involved with environmental and food issues and become advocates and change agents locally, addressing their politicians. And many of them are incredibly brave, and I find that very inspiring. So there's not just one Greta Thunberg, but many. And I think one basic precondition for collective action of youth is that young people actually have to be able to participate on their own terms. So hence we need to shape the participatory processes properly, so that children and young people can, that they have safe spaces and spaces where they can discuss their aspirations and bring them to the attention of decision makers. Youth are underrepresented in high-level debates, but I think there are allies there that think that intergenerational justice is really a legitimate concern, and they would listen. Now, there are some key advocacy struggles that we have identified for DKA Austria, and I encourage everybody to do their own analysis. Generally, I think COVID-19 is, of course, changing everything. And there's a lot of fog now around international institutions and governments, making it difficult to actually engage with them and do advocacy because people cannot meet like they used to. At the same time, COVID-19 shows us that rapid changes and radical decisions can be taken and are possible. And I find that also encouraging in some ways. So what we, I think, generally need to do is we need to call out for solutions. We need to push for a paradigm shift in support of agroecology. I don't know if you heard about agroecology, but it basically refers to a diversified form of agriculture based on regenerative ecological cycles and symbiosis. So supporting agroecology and smallholder approaches. Also, we need to make sure that governments change the way they engage with smallholders and become truly participatory. So agroecology, I would say, is a promising new paradigm. There is a lot of evidence coming out around it from the Food and Agriculture Organization, from the Committee on Food Security, through the high-level panel of experts who have produced recently a report on it. Also from the IPES food experts, and many universities I mean, there's really I think the case has been made now, and the evidence is there, and it's just about making it a weapon in the hands of smallholders. And then also the United Nations Declaration on Peasants' Rights. I think there are some struggles there. We need to make sure that the rights holders, the peasants and people working in rural areas actually know about it and are informed about it. It has just been passed in December 2018. And at least earlier this year, when I spoke to farmers in India and Nepal and the Philippines, nobody really knew about it. And I think that needs to change. Also, we need to lobby governments and the Human Rights Council to come up with an implementing mechanism for the declaration, to actually give it hands and legs. And then while we do that, we can also use existing special procedures at the Human Rights Council to actually set precedents on existing cases that are brought to our attention using the Peasants' Rights Declaration. I would also like to touch on the Food System Summit that will be coming up next year, late next year. It has been criticized by many NGOs for since the World Economic Forum and people from the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa are involved in the organizing group of people. But I think whether we like it or not, this will be the place where governments discuss food systems transformation, and it will be very important to have vocal voices there, pushing for agroecology, calling out for solutions, and making sure that policies are conducive to smallholders at that summit. And I think the United Nations is trying to make it inclusive. They will use a method called Food Systems Dialogues to prepare the summit. There will be at least one per country. And I think this is an interesting avenue for advocacy. Civil society and youth groups could try to influence the agenda of those dialogues. They could try to get a seat at the table, or they could even organize their own dialogue processes and then feed those results into the official process preparing for the summit, and also influencing their government's position at the summit. And I would like to stop here, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you. And I will stop the sharing of my screen now, if I can. Yes, that's it already.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Philip Buck, for your informative presentation. I would like to ask one question, that is, can we end world hunger by 2030?
Yes, I think we certainly can. But it would be a big job, and it would require a complete change in the way we produce and distribute and market and link people with food systems. But I think the solutions are there. It's not a problem of production or of amount of food globally produced, but it is a question of access and of capacities of people to actually get that food to the right place, or to be empowered to be able to produce food at the right places. And I think I think governments can do a lot. We can change the extension programs, agricultural extension programs. We can focus agricultural funding on smallholder communities more. We can gear agricultural research money to actually co-create knowledge together with farmers, rather than in agricultural research institutions. And of course, generally, we need to change the way we consume food. Food is in many parts of the world actually too cheap. And that has squeezed agriculture, and that also needs to change. Agriculture needs to be reevaluated, and farmers need to be able to get a good livelihood from their work. So there are many things we can actually do, and unfortunately, I think there's still not enough focus and political will to actually do it. And I think that's why we need to push for that.
Hello there. Yeah, thank you so much for all the insightful words that you have given. So my question to you is, as you have mentioned, safe spaces for the youth to speak for the food choices, right? So how far do you think the younger generation will be able to have that kind of space to speak up for the future about these, food changes that they have to bring? Also, as you have mentioned about the peasants' right by the UN, how far do you think the United Nations will be taking up this activity or this change and giving the lead to the younger generation for having the right over the food and bringing the changes over food and giving a greater impact?
Yes. I think that is a very good question, how to create those safe spaces. And I honestly don't have the answer in my desk. We need to find that out. And I think we need regional approaches to that, because participation situations and local situations, and also in the spaces for civil society action are not the same everywhere. They are very different. The situation of paternalism is very different in different places in the world. Gender issues are very different. And especially in those places where there is not much space for young people to actually speak out and become advocates, we need to be sure that they are safe, that they are not, that they will not be harassed, that they we cannot burn them for the cause. We have to also make sure that that they are safe. So there are human rights issues there that go way beyond the right to food and that we need to take care of. So I think we need to first sit down and draft the participatory processes, and that also would require capacity building in terms of how to facilitate that. Now, with regards to the question, would the UN listen? I think yes and no. I think there are people there that that are interested to get young people's voices, but at the same time, it must be clear to us that this is not a one priority in terms of global issues, and it probably is a very long struggle, and it will be an ongoing struggle for many years. So we should not be in the illusion that we can fulfill peasants' rights, maybe even in our lifetime. I don't know, but for sure it's worth the struggle, and even and I think we should look at individual cases where that struggle can be won, and I think they exist, and we should draw hope from that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your wonderful answer. It's really helpful for me though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your time and for the wonderful orientation that you have given. Now I would like to invite Rachel Kalawa, MIJARC World Treasurer, to introduce Astrid Lee Beringer.
Okay, I think it seems
Kumari, can you do it?
Not available. Father Robino, you can take up, please.
I'm saying, Krishnaka, can you do the introduction? Okay. Okay. In any case, we have the next speaker, and the person to introduce the next speaker has just disappeared. So may we call upon our very speaker to begin the sharing now.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today and to give you an input on the United Nations Declaration and the right to food in the context of environmental and climate justice. My name is Astrid Lee Beringer, and I work for FIAN International. It's an international human rights organization with its international secretariat here in Heidelberg in Germany. And my major focus is land, natural resources, and climate. We are an international organization that fights for the realization of the right to food. And yeah, I'm happy to tell you more. And I would like to share my screen. So can everyone see my screen? I guess so. So maybe a little bit of a background to myself. I spent several years in Southeast Asia, and I conducted research in the field of urban climate resilience And I've also worked with the land rights movement in the Philippines, where I supported them in advocacy work and public relations work. And I just recently joined FIAN International here in Germany. But yeah, I'm very happy to present to you today the United Nations declarations, which already Philip gave a little bit of an input. So first of all, I will give you a brief introduction to FIAN International, and then I will elaborate what the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Peasants is, and how is it connected to the right to food and the environmental and climate justice context. And then I will present to you several rights that are presented in the declaration that are important to address the climate crisis. And at the end, I will present you a few ideas how you practically apply the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Peasants. So, not sure if you know FIAN International. FIAN stands for Food First Information Action Network. And we fight for the realization of the right to food and nutrition since over 30 years. We have 19 national sections in 4 regions, and we have consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council, which means that we can participate in the different human rights bodies and be part of important negotiations. How do we work? We analyze and we document cases of violations of the right to food. We do awareness raising. We do capacity building, advocacy, and lobby work at the national, regional, international level. And yeah, what is the UN job and how is it linked to the right to food and environmental climate justice? As we heard first, I think I will give you a little bit of information on how is climate change and eco-destruction linked to human rights. Well, climate change, eco-destruction, they pressure global food security immensely, water availability, housing, and health, which are all essential elements to live a life in dignity. And as we heard already, the biggest burden on those groups who carry the biggest burden are the small-scale farmers, herders, fishers, indigenous people, and forest-dependent people, because they rely on natural resources for their livelihood. And the consequence of climate change and eco-destruction, they also threaten substantial human rights. At the same time, national and global responses to counter climate change, they also result in human rights abuses. For example, land conversion for biofuel production leads to land grabs. And a very important document, a key document in this context is the UN Paris Agreement from 2015, because it connects for the first time climate protection with human rights and food security, which is a very important starting point. And one of the major drivers, which is important, as we already mentioned, is of climate change is the industrial food production system, the agri-food production system, which the UN drop is addressing at many passages. And this is a very important starting point when we talk about food security and peasants' rights and the role of peasants to fight climate change, especially the young peasants. Here, just a brief, well, I will skip this because of time issues. So what is the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas? It was adopted in 2018 by the UN General Assembly and defines rights and states' responsibilities. And it was really a milestone achievement, a success of peasants and social movements, grassroots civil society organizations, NGOs, and allied academics from all around the world who have been campaigning for this through La Via Campesina, and we were also part of this since early 2000, to finally have an international legal instrument that defends people's rights over the territory, seas, forests, and water. for the first time, peasants are not only subjects of rights, but fundamental actors. And the UN drop is a declaration, which means it's a soft law. That means it's not legally binding, but it is essential because it is a reference point for interpretation, standard setting, and it's a guidance document in domestic implementation of rights. And as Philippe already said, first of all, it's important that young farmers and peasants and rural people around the world know about this declaration, because that's the starting point. And then the major hurdle will be the implementation, of course. So why the UN drop? What makes it different? Because it includes existing human rights, such as the right to food, and it defines new rights, such as the right to land, the right to seeds and biodiversity, and food sovereignty, and also very important collective rights and women's rights. Why the UN drop? Because it highlights the intrinsic relationships that rural people have with the environment. Rural people are the guardians of biodiversity, and their traditional knowledge, their sustainable farming practices, especially agroecology, that really helps to cool down the planet, and it's a key to address climate change. The UN drop promotes a transition towards a healthy, sustainable and just food system, which is the alternative to the industrial agri-food production system that drives climate change. And the UN drop promotes land tenure security, and access to land, as we heard, is essential to realize the right to food, and it's also essential to restore biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I will tell you more about this a little bit later. So the UN drop has included several rights that are important when we talk about addressing the climate crisis. We have, for example, the right to development, the right to food and nutrition, food sovereignty, and the right to land and other natural resources, the right to conservation and the protection of the environment, seeds and biodiversity, also very important, water and sanitation, collective rights and rural women's rights. And all of these rights are important in the climate justice angle. For example, the right to land and natural resources. That right had been granted only exclusively to indigenous people until this declaration came out. And it's important because it's a prerequisite to realize the right to food. And we live now in a time where land has become a more contested and even scarcer resource. And it's also important in relation to climate adaptation policies. Agro-food industries are pushing for climate solutions such as climate smart agriculture, which often have a negative impact on the environment and they lead to human rights violations. For example, land conversion for tourism development causes evictions and displacement. And the declaration also puts a very strong focus on land tenure security, which I have already mentioned is crucial to address climate change, because when people have access to land, they can realize their right to food, they can feed their families and children, they can be resilient to climate change, and they can also address climate change because the way they cultivate land. And last, I want to give you some practical ideas how you could apply the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. It is a political and legal tool that defines rights that states and also private bodies should respect and protect. For example, there should be emphasis drawn on the new rights, the advocacy of these new rights, the right to seeds, biodiversity, right to land, and collective rights. For example, when there are land rights claims of indigenous people or local communities, and that happens in especially the Amazon region very often, where the government or the corporation is questioning their ethnic affiliation, they can take recourse to their right to land, which is also defined in the UN drop. And I've mentioned already land is a contested resource, and land in particular has been traditionally cultivated in many parts around the world collectively. And for the first time, the UN drop gives this recognition to peasants and their collective nature in farming. So that is very important to highlight in advocacy work. At the national level, the UN drop can be used as a guidance document, as an inspiration, a model, a reference to guide the implementation of specific rights. It can be used as a framework to negotiate new policies on the rights that are contained in the declaration. For example, it can be used to for when there is a new agricultural law to define peasants. And that is a starting point to define who are peasants and what is their role in that context. The declaration can be used to evaluate existing policies and laws, policies that are violating peasants' rights. For example, there is a law or a policy that favors agri-food businesses who are driving deforestation. They must respect peasants' rights. It can be also used as an interpretation of the law in court. It can back up your legal arguments. And very important, the UN drop also gives the space to claim corporate accountability. And corporations are those who are in the agri-food business. Their activities are harmful for the environment and for people, and they're violating especially rural people, peasants' rights. And you can produce reports and monitor these violations, and then you can bring them to the international level. And there are entry points, as Philip also mentioned, the special procedures, the special rapporteurs. There are several rapporteurs, such as the rapporteur for the right to food, the rapporteur for human rights and the environment, and they also make many linkages to climate change and eco-destruction. They produce reports, and you as civil society, you can give inputs, you can prepare reports and send them to them, and they can take them up in their own reports and present their recommendations to the Human Rights Council in their sessions. And that can be brought to states' attention and request application. And also there are the universal periodic reviews, which is a review that all states have to go through who are members to the UN every 5 years. And you as civil society, you can produce your own reports and submit them. Yeah, so I'm at the end. I would like to thank you for listening. I hope it was clear and understandable. And if you have any further questions, you can also contact me. You can visit our website. And we as FIAN, we are currently also producing a number of briefings with which we are trying to make the UN drop more practical, understandable for CSOs, for peasants, and I'm happy if you, check our website and find information there. And if you don't have a question, I have a question. How do you think the UN drop could be useful for your own work and advocacy? So thank you. And I stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Astrid, for your wonderful presentation. We are sorry that our facilitator unable to connect you in time, but I would like to give you a few words about you. So Astrid, she is an advocacy officer of land and natural resources and the climate at the International Secretariat of FIAN. So FIAN is one of the very strong force network of working as a peasants' rights in UN declaration. And also that's why we chosen the speaker from FIAN. And thank you very much, Astrid, for your wonderful presentation and also information about the UN declaration, peasant rights, and also the right to food and climate justice. And thank you very much. And now I open the floor for the questions. Participants, do you want to ask questions? You please raise your hand and you can, the technicians will give the access to you to ask the questions. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, so as you have mentioned about the UN drop, which is opening up many possibilities, this is just on a personal note. How far do you think it's going to give space in the first place to give education, I mean, to give an insight about all the rights that it's giving to the people?
What do you mean?
I mean, it's looking up into food rights and land rights and all such. And before doing into all this, how far will it be helpful in firstly educating the people in the first place and then proceeding in giving all these rights?
You mean how useful it will be to educate people?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I think it's very useful because, as Philip said, there are many peasants and farmers and rural people around the world who do have no idea about human rights, and they have no idea about what rights they do have as peasants and farmers. And I think the starting point is education, and it's spreading that there is this declaration that there are these rights, and what does it mean, and what responsibilities do states have to fulfill, to protect and respect those rights. And once that is there, there can be a critical mass that can bring this, as I said, you can use it as a reference point and shape policies, you can shape laws, and you can bring it to different areas. But as you said, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's important because it does exactly define these essential rights.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Buenos días. Buenos días.
Yes.
Buenos días.
Buenos días, le oímos.
Tengo una pregunta desde Colombia. Mi nombre es Ramón Bona del Campo. Quisiera manifestar y aportar. Nosotros conocemos como campesinos nuestros derechos. Lo que yo veo que podría servir es en cuanto al conocimiento, la educación que se debe partir desde la familia a los niños para que todos podamos conservar el medio ambiente y cuidar realmente lo que queremos. Tenemos una inquietud porque nosotros aquí en Colombia conocemos como seguridad alimentaria el que tiene dinero. Si yo tengo dinero en mi cuenta en el banco, tengo seguridad alimentaria, pero me preocupa porque eso aumentaría el consumismo, que es lo que no queremos. Porque si yo tengo dinero, tengo mi seguridad alimentaria y consumo lo que a mí se me antoje. Nosotros aquí conocemos, es como soberanía alimentaria, que viene de nuestro ser, lo que viene de nosotros, lo que nosotros tenemos en nuestro campo y en nuestras parcelas o en nuestras fincas. Eso es lo que conocemos como soberanía alimentaria, lo que yo puedo consumir sanamente sin perjudicar el medio ambiente, sin perjudicar lo que nosotros necesitamos. Ahora yo tengo una pregunta. Es, ¿qué está haciendo la gente de las ciudades para aportarnos? Porque yo oigo en la reunión que solo el campo es el que viene trabajando sobre este tema, la lucha de los campesinos contra el cambio climático. pero ¿qué va a hacer la ciudad? ¿Qué solución inmediata tienen ustedes como directivas de MIJARC y Organización Mundial para aportarnos a nosotros como campesinos, para poder mitigar inmediatamente este cambio climático que se nos vino encima y que si no tomamos acciones inmediatas vamos a tener consecuencias muy graves?
So thank you very much for your comment and your question. And it is a good question and an important question because we are talking about rural people. And I don't think that the fight alone is at the side of the rural people. And you're right, something has to change in the cities as well, because it's not only the way food is produced, it's also how it is distributed and how it is consumed. And there needs to be awareness about where is the food coming from and under what conditions is it produced. And consumers who are living in the cities, they are able to raise their awareness and to also speak up about this. And surely it's not only about the choice of food, and it's also about actively demanding that something has to change. Also, people in cities can demand that the rights of peasants must be fulfilled, and that food systems have to become more sustainable. And there are, at least in cities, there are different initiatives to support. At least here in Heidelberg, there are a lot of, well, that is Germany, of course, it's different to other cities around the world, but there are these, what do you call it, solidarity food sharing networks, where people, for example, are supporting a number of small-scale farmers. You have a membership and you can you support the production, and you also take the risks. So you consume what is being produced at the side of the farmers. But once there is, for example, I don't know, water shortage, there is drought, or say flood, or any kind of harvest was destroyed, you carry the risk together with the producers. This happens at a very small scale level, and it does happen in several cities, and that's just one initiative, I think, that is happening. I'm not sure if this is answering the question. I think maybe others would also like to share something on this.
Muy buenos días, mi nombre es María Ninfa Daza, de acá de la Altillanura colombiana, y pues estamos contentos de estar participando y que seamos escuchados también y nos hayan dado esta oportunidad. Y entonces me preocupa también que hablemos de cambio climático y no hablemos de soluciones rápidas, ya a corto plazo, ¿sí? Ya sabemos que los produce, ya sabemos que tenemos encima un cambio climático, ya sabemos que la seguridad alimentaria está en un desbalance, pero nosotros queremos apostarle a la soberanía alimentaria. Desde el campo se puede y la estamos promoviendo aquí como mingueros Altillanura, como mujeres empoderadas de la Altillanura. Queremos que la mujer sea independiente desde el momento que le dé un valor agregado a su producto, que no compita en grandes, sino que compita en lo pequeño, pero ser muy eficiente. Queremos que nuestros hijos enseñarles desde el vientre de la mamá el amor por las semillas, el amor por cuidar el suelo, por cuidar el agua, por cuidar el bosque. Sabemos que si tenemos estos 4 elementos somos personas muy eficientes y somos muy afortunados, pero también queremos que la gente de la ciudad tenga la oportunidad de tener su propia comida, tener la soberanía alimentaria. Y vea que estamos incrementando unos modelos aquí en unas canastillas, y eso, todo aquello que sacamos en la cocina, desperdicios, estamos alimentando las lombrices. Con ellas estamos haciendo nuestra propia huerta, donde en 6 canastillas tenemos comida para todo lo de echar a la olla inmediatamente, como es el cilantrón, el tomate, las medicinales. Y vea cómo esas son las cosas que queremos que impacten y queremos promover desde los hogares y desde nosotros. Y aquellos intercambios de semillas que si no hacemos y cuidamos nuestras semillas nativas, entonces siempre irá a haber hambre, porque tendremos que depender de allá, de Monsanto, que nos vende una semilla bien cara, bien contaminada. Entonces eso es lo que nosotros queremos, promover lo bueno, promover que nos hablen de cosas tangentes que podamos hacerlo, que podamos promoverlo. Entonces, muchas gracias. Les habló María Ninfa Daza desde aquí de la Altillanura, y muy contenta de poder participar en este gran proyecto como es MIJARC. Gracias.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation and also questions and answers from Astrid and all the participants from South America. There is a small technical and also the time management question for everyone. Due to delay our webinar, so I request all the participants, you please just listen the presentations, and if you have any questions, please drop on the questions Q&A chat box. So after that, we will give you the answers. So we request on behalf of the organizing team, so please write your questions after the presentations instead of asking. Thank you very much. Now over to Deepti.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishnakar. Now I would like to invite Angela to introduce Gerard Moorman. Thank you.
Hello. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Hello.
Sharon, I guess some technical problem. She was here till a moment ago. I would like to introduce Mr. Jared, who works for KNR. That is a conference of religious in the Netherlands. So he's an activist in promoting ecological awareness, and his area of expertise is implementation of Laudato Si, especially in the global south. So he has given several webinars and seminars and workshops, and today he's here to inspire the young minds. So I welcome Mr. Jared.
Thank you, Father Bosco, for this introduction, and greetings from Amsterdam, Holland. I am a theologian, a lay theologian, not a priest, but I've been working the last 15 years for the Conference of Major Superiors in the Netherlands. And I've had the privilege to work with missionaries, especially people who work for justice, peace, and care of creation. So I've worked closely with both the older generation of missionaries, the Europeans, people from the global north that have worked in many countries in the global south and returned. But I also have a lot of contact with newer generations of missionaries that come from the global south now to our countries. And it is striking how within the missionary movement, awareness has grown over the last 50 years. So I want to briefly paint the picture of how missionaries got involved in ecological issues and how mission has changed over the years. I would call it an ecological conversion of mission. That might sound a little bit strange to talk about conversion because in the mind of many, mission is about conversion. But I think if you would ask missionaries what they are all about, it's mostly about, there's a wonderful definition of mission that I would like to quote, and it's preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. That's a quote that's attributed to Saint Francis. I'm not sure if he's really the origin of these words, but it does point to the fact that mission is not so much about preaching. It's much more about being driven by gospel values like love, mercy, justice. And missionaries have always tried to reach out to people on the margins of society, especially the poor. And in that way, I think they've been on the front line of the church meeting the important social issues of the time. Now, traditionally, mission has been very active in promoting education, promoting medical care. But what I heard from the older generation of missionaries is that already in the 70s and definitely in the 80s, they realized that working for the health of people and not addressing the environmental crisis would be you cannot divide the two. Missionaries started to notice that people got sick from the environment they were in, especially in rural areas. The poor are living in the most polluted places, the most vulnerable places when storms hit or floods hit. In agricultural areas, the poor are very dependent on the land, and from all the traveling I've done in both South America, Africa, and Asia, each time I hear that farmers complain that they cannot depend on the seasons anymore. They often do not quite know when to sow the seeds. That's something you hear everywhere in all over the world. So very early on, missionaries, religious started to realize they had to address climate change and the environmental crisis as well. I must say that women religious sisters have been really the pioneers within the church doing this. I've heard some wonderful examples of sisters setting up ecological farms and educating people, whether it is in Africa, Asia, Latin America, or in the North. I think they've also been the pioneers in exploring ecological spirituality, more so than men. And unfortunately, within the church is the men that speak up mostly, but the women do much of the groundwork. So there's been a movement within the church, especially within the missionary movement, of growing awareness about ecology for decades. But still, 2015 was a game changer when Laudato Si came out 5 years ago. Many of the religious that I know were tremendously glad and relieved that the Pope spoke up so eloquently on these issues, and that he connected issues of ecology with the issues of poverty, of hunger, of justice. As far as the church is concerned, the wider church, it means that those who have always been working on issues of justice and peace and climate, they don't feel marginalized anymore. They feel supported now, and it's obvious that what they do is not something that's marginal, but belongs at the heart of what the church is all about. It's when I spoke briefly about ecological conversion, I want to share a little a story or a little interview that I just read about our Pope Francis and how he was somehow his own ecological conversion. A couple of weeks ago, he spoke to a French environmentalist that visited the Vatican and that got an audience. And I was very surprised to hear that that it was only in 2007 that our Pope realized that how much our faith has to say about the ecology. In 2007, Pope Francis was still an archbishop in Argentina, and he was chosen as the president of the Bishops' Conference of the South America, of the Latin America, the CELAM, at Aparecida. And he heard the bishops of Amazon consistently speak about the urgent need to address ecological issues. And slowly he started to realize how important the issue was. What I'm trying to say is that the Pope himself was quite late in realizing the importance of this issue. And still, 8 years later, he came out with an encyclical, with a document that was widely acclaimed as one of the very important documents addressing the situation of the world right now and pointing a way forward to a future that's sustainable for all. In spite of this all, I still think the church has a long way to go. We've heard some very knowledgeable speakers from NGOs from different countries, and much of the expertise can be found there. In a way, the church should be humble because we have arrived on the scene quite late. And there's still a lot that we need to learn from the academical world, the world of the NGOs. At the same time, we should not be too modest because the world is, the Catholic Church counts more than a billion members. And I think if we keep working on educating believers about Laudato Si and about the encyclical that will come out next week, Father Bob Steck already mentioned it, and it is going to be about the need for change, social, economic, ecological change. So we are being given very good food for thought by our Pope. So I think many of the people who are listening now are members of a church. I would encourage you to take these documents, the words of the Pope, seriously, to get together to discuss these documents, to make connections with other parties within society to work towards social change. Perhaps I should leave it at this. If you have questions, please put it on the question and answers thing. And time-wise, I think it's good to leave it at this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Gerard Moorman, for your wonderful orientation. I would now like to invite Theophil, who will introduce the African speaker, Professor Annie. Thank you. Over to you, Theophil.
Okay. Now I would like to invite Professor Annie Yombi. Is currently a full-timer lecturer at Catholic Zambian University in the Department of Studies in Kalulushi, Zambia. Professor Annie Yombi was a part-time lecturer and Information and Communication University in Lusaka, Zambia, under the Environmental Science Department. And she has been engaged in environmental consultancies since 2017. And Yobi has an honors degrees majoring in geography, environmental studies, and tourism management from the University of Namibia, and a Masters of Arts degree cultural environment in Africa from the University of Cologne, Germany. Additionally, she has done some short studies on biodiversity management with the Humboldt University, Germany. Now, I would like to welcome Professor Annie. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yes, so today I will talk to you about Africa and the right to food in the context of climate change. So as we've heard already from a daily basis, on a worldwide scale, we are faced with issues where people, women and men, are struggling to provide for their families, struggling to provide for their children, even though there's enough food in the world to cater for everyone, but still over 600 million people go to bed without any food. So issues of alleviating hunger and nutrition are among the greatest challenges that we're faced with today, particularly in the global south. Yeah, we're not only faced with the problem of not having enough food, but also issues to do with education, lack of enough education or lack of education in general, and unemployment. So climate change compromises the ability of all regions in the world, as we've heard, to provide for themselves. It has shown a lot of impacts, ranging from socio-economic to unpredictable rainfall patterns, to droughts, floods, which have resulted in the disruption of agricultural systems in general. And subsequently, these affect food security. So across Africa, so we have issues to do with droughts, heat stress, and flooding, which lead to a reduction in crop yield, right, and livestock productivity. East Africa is currently being faced with a food crisis resulting to low rainfall patterns. This is a serious matter because almost the entire planet depends on rain-fed agriculture or rainfall for their agricultural purposes. So about 60% of the world's arable land which we can use for agricultural purposes, is found in Africa, right? And with agriculture being the main source of food production, amounting to about 70%, right? So nevertheless, only about 10% of the global agricultural output comes from Africa. So agriculture in Africa is mainly affected by low levels of productivity, underinvestment and biased policies, and a lack of access to women to productive capital and land tenure. So they have no access to land rights, women. So this has contributed largely to high levels of poverty in Africa. Coming back to East Africa, there's been a slow progress in providing or improving their food security. So to try to deal with this issue of food insecurity, about 9 countries have pledged to urge their governments to tackle this food insecurity issue. So this is through the enactment of legislation and allocating adequate resources to cater for those who are in need. So moving to southern part of Africa, between 2018 and 2019. So the number of food insecure people in the region was about 29 million people, which accounts for about 14% of the total population in Africa. So with an increase in climate shocks, this number is projected to increase. So therefore, we see a need to act and build resilience to avoid the situation of increased food security or insecurity, sorry. So the Southern Africa Development Committee, the SADC region, has a high number of children who are stunted. They are stunted because they do not have access to enough food. And as we've been hearing, this webinar primarily focused on the youth, and we try to empower how the youth can be made aware of environmental issues and how they can participate. So if we have a high number of children who are stunted, so what are the implications? The implications are that these children will not be able to develop fully as they are supposed to. They will not be able to participate in school activity, and subsequently this affects their employment levels in future and socialization process. And we are talking about sustainable development. So that means sustainable development in the context of Africa is kind of disturbed in that context. So Southern Africa is prone to issues of climate change and variability, which affects food security and livelihoods. So the region has suffered worse droughts between 2014 and 2016, resulting from the El Nino phenomenon. So in Africa, we don't see too much climate change impact, but variability, basically. So these are just changes, yeah? So in the last decades, Africa has suffered the impact of climate change with frequent prolonged dry spells, extreme high temperatures and floods. This has worsened the situation of small-scale farmers who depend on rain for their food production. And as I earlier mentioned, these small-scale farmers, they are the ones that produce about 70% of the total food in Africa. So in order for countries in Africa to deal with the situation of floods and droughts, they have engaged in collaboration with the World UN Food Agriculture Organization in climate smart agricultural practices, such as conservation agriculture. So conservation agriculture or ecosystem-based adaptation approaches to agriculture, they contribute to sustainable food systems, which help small-scale farmers to raise their productivity. As I mentioned earlier, there are low levels of productivity among the small-scale farmers. So the practice of conservation agriculture or conservation farming focuses mainly on three areas. The first one is to minimize the disturbance of soil, leading to soil infertility. And secondly, they try to encourage crop rotation. So in the past, the trend was just to produce one type of crop year in, year out. To a large extent, we take a lot of maize in Africa. That's a staple food in many countries. So people would plant the same maize year in, year out. And in the long term, that has some negative impacts with soil fertility. So now they are trying to, they are being encouraged to do multi-cropping, different types of crops. Today it's maize, maybe next year there's sweet potatoes. So this practice kind of builds nutrients in the soil. And the last one is residue retention. So residue retention basically is a practice where when you, for instance, you plant maize and then you remove the cob of maize that you need for your consumption. So there's remainder, like the stem of the maize, you don't throw that away, but you put it back in the field as some kind of organic manure. So that kind of keeps you from using chemical manure, which stresses the soil. So these practices are encouraged for perceived biodiversity, environmental, climate, and food security benefits. So additionally, the practice has helped to ensure food security, including the building of resilience among households, and as well as climate change adaptation. So moving to West Africa, this region is extremely vulnerable to climate change, particularly because it's also largely dependent on rain-fed agriculture. So major changes in climate are already being noticed in this region, but worse is anticipated to happen or expected to happen, right? So if these impacts are to be avoided, the region needs to urgently find ways of conserving their ecosystems, as well as supporting the peasant farmers or the small-scale farmers, and as well as integrating indigenous knowledge in their farming practices. So the trend in the past has been to use scientific knowledge. So to a large extent, the traditional ways of doing things was ignored, but now they're being encouraged to integrate both the traditional and the scientific, right? So for many years now, there have been signs that climate change is changing significantly in West Africa. So almost every country in this region has experienced year in and year out reduction in rainfall. So the whole water cycle, because of these rainfall disturbances, have been disturbed, with serious consequences for the number of natural disasters rising. I think currently in September, I saw a news article in Sudan, which is experiencing floods. These floods have resulted in a lot of people dying, losing their lives, and as well as losing their homes. And this has major implications on food security. Yeah. So biodiversity is essential for mankind, for its supplies, the raw materials and the genes that make possible the emergence of new plants, plant varieties, and as well as new animal species on which farmers and others can depend on. Yeah, so biodiversity at all levels increases resilience to these stresses that I talked about, right? So that is why it is important for genetically varied populations, these are different types of plant species and animals, to be encouraged, as opposed to us depleting or finishing them. So climate change threatens biodiversity and damages the normal functioning of ecosystems. So by the end of this century, huge losses in biodiversity are expected in West Africa. So these losses and associated disruptions such as droughts, fires, pests, things like that, will severely disturb the resilience of ecosystems. Right. I think looking at time, I'll end here unless there are questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Annie. Now, thank you very much for your presentation, and also you covered all the points from the Africa. So on behalf of MIJARC World, we thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Dr. Dan Bosco Darcy. Now he is a postdoctoral scholar, University of Leuven, Belgium. Now I would like him to moderate the final statements from the panelists. The floor is yours, Bosco.
Thank you so much, Krishnakar. This has been a wonderful webinar of high quality, very uplifting, passionate, inspiring, and each panelist has presented from his or her viewpoint what young people can do. We are all in this together, as Nicholas pointed. And as Philip said, youth are underrepresented in high-level discussion. You know, it's young people who have to take chance. It's young people's time. And you are the decision makers. You are change makers. If one girl like Greta Thunberg could take a decision and be committed to that, no matter what comes, things can move. We can bring about change. So before Mr. Ray sums up the whole presentation from each perspective of each speaker, may I ask each speaker to give us short thought to take home. What can we go home with? Just 59 seconds. If you are shorter, it's still better. Mr. Nicholas had to attend another important meeting, so he left us, but we have all the other speakers. May I ask you to take a few seconds and give us 1 minute, less than 1 minute thought to take home.
Father Bosco, I'll go first because I honestly have to go do a funeral. It's morning in the United States here, so I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of such a conversation and the energy and the hopefulness of hearing people's perspectives, insights, comments, and practical suggestions is just inspiring. I'm very anxious to get all the presentations that were given today and actually share that, especially with my young people here in the United States. Very, very hopeful, very good to be together. And if we work together, then we can choose the better path for the whole world.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the Bob. That was fantastic. May I now ask Luz Mary, could you just give us an elevator thought, elevator point?
Hola, ¿me escuchan? Bueno, solo agradecer una vez más por el espacio. Hay mucho por hacer. Me gustaría quedarme con el pensamiento que se le atribuye al activista Patrick Geddes. Piensa globalmente y actúa localmente. Jóvenes del mundo entero tenemos un gran compromiso y una misión con nuestro planeta, con nuestra casa común. Seamos nosotros parte de la solución. Muchísimas gracias al Comité Internacional de MIJARC. Gracias a todos los panelistas que han estado en este día y a todos los que han participado en esta oportunidad. Gracias.
Philippa, what would you tell the young people, something that they should go home now? Very brief and short.
Yes, and I have to think about the soil because I'm personally becoming increasingly fascinated with soil science, even though it's completely alien to me before. And I would like to mention the symbiosis between certain mushrooms, fungal species, and they actually work as mediators and markets for nutrients between different plants. So they take nitrogen or phosphate from one plant and they trade it for sugar with another plant. So basically they balance the soil health. And it's a very key symbiosis for the functioning of agroecology and organic agriculture. And I think maybe we should become more like those mushrooms. Not by staying underground, but by negotiating, facilitating, understanding different species of humanity, and then spreading the message into the planet. And yes.
That was indeed incredible.
Look it up. Look it up. It will lead you to many places.
I'm a lover of mushrooms, and now you are challenging me to be a lover of soil. I will try and make an effort. Thank you. Astrid Beringer, it's over to you.
Thank you for having me here and giving input to these very important discussions. And as a final thought, I can say that climate action must be understood as a collective commitment. And I think it is important that, especially in terms of climate change, environmental and climate movements have to join forces with human rights movements to be able to call for a global transformation of our current harmful food system towards sustainable means of production. So supporting human rights-based approach in this environmental and climate crisis is essential to secure the needs for current and future generations to realize the right to food. Thank you.
Thank you. So collective network is the key. We're all united. We are all in a network, in a web of relationship, and we're all in it together. Wonderful. May I now ask Mr. Jared, what would be your final comment?
Well, I would like to encourage everybody to think about this concept of ecological conversion. What does it mean to you personally? And just to give you some thoughts, what does it mean for you on an individual level? How can you change your lifestyle? And then I'm talking about recycling, reusing, or reducing the things that you are using. But it's not just on an individual level, it's also on a communal level. How can you as a believer in your church community raise awareness about these issues? And it's not just about the church. How can you join forces with campaigns that are led by others in the environmental movement, for example? And then perhaps on the most essential level, that's the level of spirituality, I think a lot of it has to do with slowing down, of being thankful for the gift of creation and enjoy nature. It's a paradox that COVID-19 slowed all of us down. And of course, it's a big tragedy, but speaking for me personally, the first few weeks and months of the lockdown were in some ways terrifying, but at the same time, it urged me to really appreciate nature, to appreciate the small things around me. So it opened up my eyes as well to the wonders of my surroundings. So ecological conversion.
Yeah,
It's
that's
key.
what we go home with, ecological conversion.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Okay, Annie. Could you please unmute?
Okay. So I'd like to thank everyone for the wonderful presentations. I really learned a lot today, and wow, it's interesting to see Sustainable Development Goal number 2 come to perspective, where there is this partnership from different parts of the world. So really, thank you. That's all I can say for now.
Thank you, Annie. Now I request Mr. Ray Kancharla to summarize the whole webinar and also to give us the final take home from each of these panelists. What do you sum up the whole webinar as one single take as we all go home now?
Okay, that's a very tough task. I have made 6-page notes from so much information and perspective that all our panelists and keynote speakers have shared. But I will put that in 5 small bullet points so that it can be remembered. One of the things that I agree from the small stakeholders, peasants and youth, the rural areas and urban areas, in our world of inequality, diversified intergenerational injustices, etc., understanding what we need to refuse, restore, reuse, and recycle. That is one. The second one I wanted to put forward is about giving safe space to youth and peasants who till today remain underrepresented in decision-making platforms to present their demands and advocate with governments, UN systems, and also at the local level. The other one is about advocating with UN on land rights and related rights of natural resources at the last mile, with specific attention to women's rights to land and natural resources and the dependent livestock. The fourth one is about change the way we live in terms of production, distribution, consumption, and prevent our world where billions of people may be displaced if we do not reduce warming, CO2, etc., and join forces in campaigns. The last one is about civil society, church, and youth have a role to co-construct both the present and the future, which is sustainable. And it is a dynamic opportunity for changing the future of our planet and to care for our common home, the Mother Earth, where no one hoping beyond hope will go hungry. Though, as on today, millions of children, youth, women, and others sleep, go to bed at night hungry. We need to change this. I will stop here. These are the 5 bullets that I have put together as a quick summary, but 6-page note can be shared with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray, for your wonderful final remarks and summary of this international webinar. Now it's time to give a vote of thanks. I'm extremely happy to share such an encouraging assurance from our wonderful keynote speakers and also speakers. And young people is discussing broadly about the care for our common home. Indeed, a modest beginning for a big change. So really, we are very happy, the MIJARC world, young people, all participants, they are really very happy about these wonderful speeches and talks, presentations from different parts of the world, Latin America, Luz Mary, Africa, Annie, and Fionn, Astrud, and Philip from DK Austria, and especially our keynote special speakers, Nicholas, and also Robert Steck and Dasya Vinay Bhaskar. And really, we are all very happy, and a heartfelt thanks to everyone to make this wonderful success of this international webinar. Regarding this climate change, the emergency siren is on. A sense of urgency has begun. We are all set to be modern prophets of environmental protection. Let's do our part. May we do our part to be a change makers. I wholeheartedly thank all the participants, speakers, dignitaries, and technical crew, especially the interpreters, Elsa and Jux, and all the wonderful people who are behind this screen to work on this wonderful webinar, especially Mr. Ray Kancharla, who given a wonderful time for his suggestions, mentored us, the young people, be the moderators, facilitators, and also to make this success. And also we thanks our staff, Nubia, and all our MIJARC world team and world coordinators, national coordinators, regional and diocesan local youth groups, those who are part of this webinar. And thank you one and all, and wish you a happy, good evening for Indians, and I think good afternoon for the Latin Americans. Thank you very much, and see you later for another webinar. Until then, connect with MIJARC. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Health for all, hunger for none.
Yes.
So finally, may God bless you all.
Thank you, Father. Thank you very much.